The salt spray kissed the window pane, just a heartbeat before the bullet did, a phantom touch preceding the lethal caress that ended Abu Jihad's life. The villa, perched on the cliffs of Sidi Bou Said, Tunisia, was a testament to his status, a fortress against the winds of political turmoil. Bougainvillea cascaded over whitewashed walls, a riot of color against the endless blue of the Mediterranean. Inside, Abu Jihad, the man the world knew as the father of the struggle, sat at his desk, the warm glow of the desk lamp illuminating a sea of papers and maps that represented the Palestinian dream. He was a man of habit, the rhythm of his life as predictable as the tide. Every night, he would work late, poring over intelligence reports, planning the next move in a conflict that had defined his life. He felt safe here, surrounded by loyal guards. His villa offered a sanctuary, a carefully constructed illusion of peace in the heart of a war zone. The air inside the villa was thick with the scent of strong coffee and the faint, sweet perfume of his wife, who had retired for the evening. The study was a masculine space, filled with the aroma of pipe tobacco and the comforting weight of leather-bound books. Maps of the region, marked with strategic locations and battle plans, adorned the walls, a visual representation of the decades-long struggle he had dedicated his life to. The rhythmic tick of a grandfather clock in the hallway was the only sound that pierced the late-night quiet, a metronome counting down the seconds until an appointment with destiny he didn't know was coming. His fingers danced across the surface of the desk, tracing the familiar lines of a document, his brow furrowed in concentration. He was immersed in his work, oblivious to the fact that his world was about to shatter. Outside, the guards, men trained in the art of vigilance, patrolled the grounds, their eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of danger. They were veterans, accustomed to threats, vigilant to protect Abu Jihad. They knew the routine, the vulnerabilities, the subtle shifts in the wind that could betray a hidden approach. They checked the perimeter, their ears straining for the slightest sound that might indicate an intruder. They were confident in their ability to protect him. Tonight, however, their usual vigilance was tinged with a comfortable complacency. The night was quiet, the moon obscured, and the familiar crash of waves against the cliffs provided a calming backdrop. The cool night air felt soothing against their faces as they exchanged quiet words, and the cigarette's glow broke the darkness. They were on duty, yes, but the weight of the day, the monotony of security, had lulled them into a false sense of invincibility. Abu Jihad glanced at the clock, a weary smile tugging at his lips. Another hour, perhaps two, and he could finally rest. He leaned back in his chair, stretching his back, the familiar creak of the leather a comforting sound. His gaze drifted to the window, the dark expanse of the Mediterranean offering a deceptive sense of peace. He took a sip of his coffee, its warmth spreading through him. In that moment, surrounded by his world, immersed in the battle, he was unaware of the shadows that were about to engulf him, of the silent hunters who had been watching, waiting, planning their deadly rendezvous with the inevitable. He didn't know that, far below, in the dark embrace of the sea, the enemy was already closing in. The air hung thick with the scent of jasmine and the distant tang of salt, but it would be the metallic taste of blood that ultimately defined the night for Inspector Khalid Ben Ali, a man of routine and quiet observation. The glint of a silenced rifle, a single projectile, and Abu Jihad's life would be extinguished like a candle in a sudden gust. He wasn't privy to the clandestine ballet unfolding under the waves, the silent choreography of death being rehearsed just beyond his reach. His world consisted of the predictable rhythm of Sidi Bou Said, a picturesque suburb where whitewashed walls spilled down to the turquoise embrace of the Mediterranean. Khalid knew the villa like the back of his hand. It wasn't just a house. It was a fixture in his patrol, a symbol of the neighborhood's uneasy peace. He'd seen Abu Jihad countless times, a figure of quiet authority, always surrounded by a phalanx of guards. Khalid had dismissed them as overzealous, until the world changed and everything was a threat. The villa seemed safe enough, perched on the cliffs, the sea acting as both a barrier and a promise of freedom. But he had been raised on proverbs, on the notion that the unseen is the most dangerous, and that a foe is never truly defeated. Tonight, his patrol followed the usual pattern. The moon was a sliver, offering little light, perfect for smugglers and lovers, useless for those trying to maintain order. He could hear the laughter from a cafe, the clatter of dice, the murmur of Arabic that wove through the neighborhood like the scent of mint tea. His boots crunched softly on the cobblestones, the familiar rhythm a counterpoint to the thrum of anticipation that always accompanied his nightly rounds. He walked past the villa, noting the precise arrangement of the security detail. The two guards at the gate, the one pacing in the shadows, the other leaned against the wall, a cigarette's ember a tiny red spark in the darkness. Tonight, as every night, Khalid felt a subtle unease that he would later recognize as the first whisper of a storm. He made a mental note to report the overly relaxed security, a standard caution against potential provocateurs, and carried on, the click of his heels fading into the night's symphony. Khalid found it hard to imagine anything truly sinister in this tranquil setting, yet he was an officer of the law, and suspicion was his second nature. He registered every flicker of movement, every unusual sound. He sensed a shift in the wind, a subtle change in the air pressure that hinted at the approaching darkness. The sea, usually a companionable presence, seemed to hold its breath. It was a prelude, he knew, to something significant, a moment when the veil between the ordinary and the extraordinary would tear, and the world would change forever. He tasted it on his tongue, the prelude of his own destiny. The bullet, a whisper of death, would arrive before the first siren wailed, a single, devastating truth delivered from the depths of the sea. The sleek black zodiacs, inflated and waiting, were swallowed by the inky embrace of the Mediterranean, the smell of salt and diesel hanging heavy in the air. 40 men, clad in tight-fitting neoprene, their faces smeared with night blackening, moved with the quiet grace of predators. They were the Shaitet 13, the naval commandos of the Mossad, the silent hunters. Each man knew his role, each breath was measured, each movement precise. Hours of meticulous planning, countless simulations, and a relentless focus on detail had culminated in this moment. The mission to eliminate Abu Jihad, the father of the fight, from the safety of his seaside villa. The air was thick with the pre-dawn chill, a dampness that seeped into bone, a constant reminder of the watery grave that waited just beneath them. The rhythmic pulse of the Zodiac's muted engines was a lullaby, barely audible above the gentle lapping of waves against the hulls. The men, their faces grim, moved with a shared purpose, a silent understanding passing between them. They were a machine, each gear oiled and working in perfect synchronicity. The anticipation was a tangible thing, a weight pressing down on their chests, mingling with the spray of the ocean. They had trained for this, rehearsed it, dreamt it. Now, it was time to live it. On the lead Zodiac, the team leader, a man known only as Aiton, checked his chronometer for the 100th time. The satellite navigation system, still cutting edge in 1988, guided them with cold, calculated precision. He could feel the tension radiating from the men around him, the suppressed adrenaline, the unwavering focus. He, too, felt the familiar knot of anticipation in his stomach, the same mix of dread and exhilaration that always preceded a mission. But there was no room for hesitation, no room for doubt. The lives of his team depended on his composure, on his decisions. Beneath the surface, the aqualung divers, the advanced team, slipped into the water, their movements as fluid and silent as the sharks that occasionally visited these waters. They were the guardians, the vanguards, tasked with securing the landing zone, ensuring the coast was clear, and verifying the approach path. Their world was one of shadows and silence, where every movement had to be calculated, every breath controlled. Their mission was to disappear, to leave no trace, to be ghosts in the water. The Zodiac surged forward, slicing through the dark water. The blackness of the night swallowed the commandos whole, blending them into the seascape. Every wave, every splash was carefully controlled, a testament to months of training and meticulous planning. As they neared the shore, the air grew thick with the smell of the land, the scent of pine trees mingling with the briny tang of the sea. Aiden could feel the tension ratchet up a notch, a tightening of the muscles in his jaw, the quickening of his pulse. He knew the time for talk was over. They were committed now. This was the moment of truth. The moment when the silent hunters would emerge from the sea and deliver death from the shadows. The world held its breath in the deafening silence. A moment frozen in time, just before the bullet, a kiss of death, would find its mark. The sheer face of the cliff loomed above, a monstrous wall of rock and shadow, swallowing the struggling forms clinging to its surface. Each rasp of a breath, each scrape of a hand against stone, echoed in the stillness, amplified by the tension that coiled tighter with every upward movement. This was the most vulnerable phase, the ascent to a destiny etched in blood and salt. The blackness of the night was absolute, a void pierced only by the distant, twinkling lights of Sidi Bou said, a mocking reminder of the world they were temporarily divorced from. Below, the rhythmic crash of the Mediterranean against the jagged rocks provided a constant, indifferent soundtrack to their desperate climb. The air, thick with the scent of brine and damp earth, clung to their skin, a chilling premonition of the cold embrace of the sea below. Their muscles screamed in protest, burning with the strain of their climb, a test of endurance and resolve. Leading the charge, the point man, a veteran of countless covert operations, moved with the practiced grace of a seasoned mountaineer. He carved his way up the cliff face, each movement precise, each placement of the piton a testament to years of training. His mind was a machine, calculating angles, judging distances, aware of the ever-present threat of failure. A single misstep, a dislodged stone, could betray their presence, plunging them into the cold abyss below. He hammered another piton, the metallic clang swallowed by the wind, and tested its solidity before clipping a carabiner and securing their rope. Behind him, the others followed, each man a shadow climbing through the shadows. The sniper, carrying his weapon like a sacred talisman, focused on maintaining his 3 points of contact with the rock, the weight of the rifle a familiar burden. The air grew thin as they ascended, and the burning in their lungs intensified. Each upward movement was a victory. Each inch gained a step closer to the target, their hearts hammered against their ribs, a primal rhythm echoing the urgency of their mission, while the wind whispered through the fissures in the rock, carrying secrets only the cliffs and the sea could understand. Thoughts flickered through their minds like fleeting images, the faces of loved ones, the echoes of their mission briefing, the weight of responsibility. They were cogs in a machine, their individual lives subordinate to the larger objective. The faces were blank, masked by the darkness, yet behind the masks, the fear was present, the thrill of the hunt, and the chilling anticipation of the kill. They clung to the cliff, their lives hanging by a thread, and felt a single drop of sweat trickle down the sniper's temple. It was then, as he paused to wipe his brow on his sleeve, that the outline of the villa, bathed in the soft glow of interior lights, appeared. The target was within reach. The bullet was a whisper, a promise kept in the dead of night, and it ripped through the world Abu Jihad knew in an instant. The sniper, nestled in the shadows on the precipice, felt the tremors of his own heartbeat, a drum against the silence. Months of meticulous planning, countless hours of training, all distilled into this single, solitary moment. His breath, slow and steady, filled the air in front of his face, a phantom cloud in the frigid night. He'd rehearsed this shot 1,000 times, on ranges, in simulators, in his mind. But no amount of practice could prepare him for the weight of this reality. He'd studied the villa, its architecture, its routines, every detail etched into his memory. He knew the layout of the study, the position of the desk, the precise angle of the window. He knew, too, the patterns of the guards, the blind spots, the rhythms of the house. He saw Abu Jihad, a dark silhouette against the warm glow of lamplight, hunched over his papers, oblivious. The man was a ghost, a figure of myth and legend, a symbol of resistance. Now, he was just a target. The sniper adjusted his stance, felt the cold press of the rifle stock against his cheek. The crosshairs danced for a moment, then settled on a chosen point, the head, just above the right ear. He held his breath, the world contracting to the narrow circle of the scope. The wind, a capricious mistress, was mercifully still. The distance was immense, the fall to the sea below a dizzying prospect, but the conditions were perfect. His finger tightened, a slow, deliberate squeeze on the trigger. Time seemed to warp, to stretch, to become impossibly elastic. He saw the bullet, a tiny silver streak, explode from the barrel, tracing a perfect arc through the darkness. It was a silent messenger, a carrier of death, an executioner in a metal shell. The rifle bucked slightly, a subtle jolt in his shoulder. The bullet found its mark. It didn't shatter the glass, only left a neat hole. Within the study, there was an instant of profound, almost surreal quiet. Then, a heartbeat later, a soft thud. Abu Jihad's head snapped back, his body slumping forward onto the desk, the papers scattering like fallen leaves. The man remained motionless, the source of his vital force extinguished. The sniper lowered his rifle, the tension draining from his body. He'd done it. The shot was clean, precise. The mission, as far as this one moment went, was a success. Now, the rest of the team were preparing to flee. They had a small window, maybe 30 seconds, before the alarms would sound, before the guards would react. He allowed himself a brief, silent acknowledgement of the moment's significance before he turned and began his own descent, the echoing report of the shot his own silent victory. The world tilted on its axis, in Abu Jihad's study, the instant the bullet found its mark. A clean, precise entry wound just above the right ear. His head snapped forward, a marionette suddenly severed from its strings, slumping onto the mahogany desk in a final, graceless bow. The study itself, moments before a sanctuary of intellectual pursuit, became a tableau of death, the air thickening with the coppery tang of blood. The flickering lamplight cast elongated shadows, painting the room in a grotesque chiaroscuro. Within the villa, a symphony of normalcy continued, oblivious to the tragedy unfolding a few feet away. Abu Jihad's wife, in another room, heard the dull thud, a sound she dismissed as something falling, perhaps a book from a shelf. The familiar sounds of the evening carried on, the murmur of the television in the living room, the clinking of glasses in the dining area, the distant chatter of the guards outside the study door. The illusion of safety, meticulously constructed and maintained, remained unbroken, a fragile bubble of calm clinging to the surface of impending chaos. The two guards stationed outside the study, men hardened by years of defending Abu Jihad, stood in their customary positions. They were veterans, vigilant and ever watchful, trained to anticipate danger from all corners. But the shot, muffled by the silencer and the thick walls, barely registered. They exchanged glances, a slight furrow in their brows, a subtle shift in their posture, but no immediate alarm. They had grown accustomed to the rhythms of the villa, the routine of their charge, and the security protocols they so diligently enforced. This minor disturbance was dismissed as a momentary anomaly, an insignificant blip in the relentless flow of their vigilance. For the commandos on the clifftop, every second now was a lifetime. They could not afford to linger. Their mission was surgical, a precise excision, and the removal of the disease had been completed. The sniper, his heart pounding a frantic tattoo against his ribs, swallowed hard, fighting to regain his composure. He lowered his rifle, the weapon now a cold, inert piece of steel. The team leader, his voice a hushed whisper in the comms, confirmed the target was down. It was time. The order to retreat sparked a flurry of movement. They turned from the abyss, their focus now shifting from the villa to the perilous descent. Each man moved with practiced efficiency, their movements a synchronized ballet of controlled urgency. They moved with a shared understanding, a silent agreement to the gravity of their circumstance. No panic, no hesitation. The chaos within the villa, the gathering of whispers, the mounting awareness that something was amiss, all of it was an impending storm, and they were the fleeting moment of eerie peace before the tempest broke. The team knew they were racing against the clock. The seconds they bought here were bought by lives elsewhere. Their time had begun. The bullet, a whisper of death, had found its mark. Now, the hunters became the hunted by time. The sniper's finger eased from the trigger, the echo of the silenced shot swallowed by the wind. A breath, two, then, a silent command, a hand gesture cutting the air like a knife. The team moved, no hesitation, no wasted motion. The sniper, still prone, began to disassemble his weapon, each movement precise, practiced, almost ritualistic. The other members of the team had already turned and were moving back towards the cliff edge, their bodies low, their eyes scanning the villa, the shadows. 30 seconds, maybe less. That was all they had before someone entered the study, before the alarm was raised, before the world exploded in a frenzy of alarms and gunfire. The descent was a controlled ballet of efficiency. The ropes, now rigged for a rapid rappel, whispered against the rock face as the commandos moved down. Their descent was a controlled freefall, a dance with gravity, each man relying on the others, trusting the knots, the gear, the training that had been drilled into their very bones. The first man over the edge, the others followed, their bodies hugging the rock, their descent a blur of movement. Below, the Zodiacs waited, their engines purring a low, almost inaudible hum against the crashing waves. The villa was beginning to stir. Lights flickered on in the windows, the soft glow now replaced by harsh electric brilliance. Voices, at first muffled, began to rise, gaining in urgency. They were too far to make out the words, but the growing panic was palpable, a tangible thing that clawed at the air. The sounds were like a crescendo of confusion. As the team reached the edge, the adrenaline now coursing through their veins. Reaching the bottom, they hit the sandy beach, a quick jog to the waterline. The cold of the Mediterranean crashed around their legs, a shock to the system after the exertion. But there was no time to register the discomfort. They were back on the Zodiacs now, the engines sputtering to life. And then they were racing away, slicing through the darkness, the roar of the engines, now a welcome sound. They left no trace. The cliff face offered no handholds, no sign that they were ever there. As the Zodiac sped away, the first vehicles of the Tunisian security details screeched to a halt in front of the villa, their sirens screaming a mournful wail into the night. It would be minutes before the full scope of what had happened became clear, minutes before the chaos began. The commandos were already far out to sea, heading back towards the safety of the missile boats, the operation a success. The taste of victory was in the air, mixed with salt spray and the cool night breeze. The gunshot, a whisper of a cough in the vast emptiness of the night, had shattered more than the stillness of Abu Jihad's study. It had shattered the illusion of invincibility. It would take a moment, a lifetime of a moment, before the echo of the bullet was replaced by the screams of horror. In the dim study, a pool of crimson blooming slowly on the polished mahogany of the desk, the assassin had already vanished, swallowed by the sea. Abu Jihad's wife, Fatima, found the silence in the villa unsettling, a stark contrast to the usual late-night clatter of papers, phone calls, and the drone of her husband's intense work. She'd heard a soft thud, assumed something had fallen, a stray book, perhaps. She called out, a gentle query lost in the labyrinthine corridors of the villa. Receiving no response, she felt a prickle of unease. Her husband was usually prompt to acknowledge her. especially when he was buried in his study, as he was tonight. The silence was, therefore, an unsettling anomaly. She began to walk towards his study. Outside the study, the bodyguards, seasoned men trained to anticipate danger, milled about, talking and smoking, their attention fractured by the late hour and the monotony of the watch. They hadn't heard anything untoward, nothing to trigger their practiced reflexes. The night remained as silent and impenetrable as a tomb. But something was wrong, and the unease in the air crackled, an electrical charge just before a storm. They turned to see Fatima, her face etched with a growing concern as she walked towards the study. Fatima reached the study door. A dim glow spilled from within, casting shadows that danced in the corners. She reached for the brass handle, her heart beginning to hammer a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She hesitated, a fleeting premonition of dread seizing her. Then, pushing aside her hesitancy, she pushed the door inward. The sight that greeted her stole her breath, a visual punch to the gut. The air in the room seemed to thicken, heavy with an almost metallic scent. Abu Jihad was there, slumped over his desk, his usually vibrant face now a mask of stillness, stained a sickening, dark red. A single, dark hole marked his temple. He was unmoving and undeniably, irrevocably dead. A scream tore from her throat, a raw, primal sound that shattered the quiet of the villa, instantly piercing the days of the bodyguards. They reacted in a flurry of movement, guns drawn, shouts erupting, as they rushed into the study. Their careful world, their ordered routine, had been shattered. They had failed. The impossible had happened. The man, the symbol of their struggle, the heart of their cause, lay dead. The world tilted on its axis the moment Abu Jihad slumped forward, the crimson stain blooming on the desk like a perverse flower. Now, after the shattering silence, chaos was unleashed. The Tunisian intelligence officer, a man named Omar, heard the sirens first. He'd been enjoying a late coffee in his apartment, a cigarette burning down to the filter, when the wail sliced through the humid night air. A distant scream followed, then another. Something was terribly, irrevocably wrong. He scrambled into his uniform, the familiar weight of his service weapon a small comfort. He had known Abu Jihad as a prominent neighbor, a man of veiled significance who always received the utmost respect and courtesy. Now he had a front row seat to the potential cataclysm. Arriving at the villa, the scene was a whirlwind of panicked movement. Guards shouted, their faces contorted with a mixture of shock and rage. The air crackled with a frenetic energy that felt alien to the usually tranquil suburb. Omar pushed through the throng, his official presence commanding a semblance of order. He had to see, he had to understand. The study, usually a sanctuary of careful thought, was now a charnel house. The silence that had followed the shot was shattered. The harsh fluorescent lights of the room cast a clinical glare across the scene. Abu Jihad's body lay slumped over his desk, a pool of blood darkening the papers beneath him. The air was thick with the coppery tang of death, a smell that clung to the back of Omar's throat. Omar's eyes scanned the room, seeking a clue, a trace, anything to make sense of the unimaginable. There was no sign of forced entry. The window, though shattered, wasn't completely broken, the bullet having apparently passed through it, leaving a small hole. No footprints on the freshly polished floors, no discarded shells. The meticulous tidiness of the room, oddly enough, seemed to emphasize the utter violation. It felt like a magician's trick, a master illusion performed with lethal precision. He spoke to the guards, their testimony fragmented with fear. They'd heard nothing, seen nothing. The shot, silenced, had been indistinguishable from the other ambient noises. Their confidence in their security protocols had been so great, it was as if they'd been lulled into complacency by the deceptive calm of the villa. Omar moved to the window, peering out at the sheer cliff face that plunged into the dark water below. His mind reeled with the impossible. The villa, which he had always considered a stronghold, was exposed. He knew of the sea. It was the vast emptiness that made him feel safe at night. He turned back to the room, studying the body, the clean wound just above the right ear. This was not the work of an amateur. This was a professional, a ghost, the Mossad. It was an inescapable thought, a whisper that began to form into a scream. The enemy could be anyone and anywhere. The villa, the once secure stronghold, had become a mausoleum of broken confidence. The silence that followed the shot was not empty. It was filled with terror. He knew that the world, much like this room, would never be the same again. It was a message etched in blood, a testament to a power that could reach across oceans and erase a man with a single, silent shot. It was a message of utter and terrible certainty. The world Abu Jihad knew, the world of power, security, and the unwavering belief in his own invincibility, shattered with a single, silent bullet. His death instantly transforming from a military commander into a martyr, his presence now a ghost, haunting the very halls he once commanded. The whispers started almost immediately. Within the OLP, a seed of chilling doubt took root, blossoming into a paranoia that gnawed at the edges of their carefully constructed reality. The comfortable illusion of safety, the belief in their own impenetrable defenses, had been brutally exposed as a fallacy. The news spread like wildfire through the ranks, each retelling more terrifying than the last. Fear, raw and untamed, replaced the usual bravado. Every shadow seemed to harbor an assassin, every unguarded moment a potential death sentence. The most trusted lieutenants, those who had sworn to lay down their lives for Abu Jihad, now eyed each other with suspicion, wondering who might be the next target, who might have compromised security, who might have somehow, unwittingly or not, played a role in the tragedy. The villa, once a symbol of defiance and strategic command, now stood as a monument to vulnerability. The very air within its walls seemed heavy with the presence of death. The guards, who had once strolled proudly, now walked in tight, nervous packs, their eyes darting constantly, their hands never straying far from their weapons. Sleep became a luxury few could afford, haunted by nightmares of shadows and silenced shots. Even the mundane routines of life were disrupted. Meals were eaten in silence, conversations hushed. The camaraderie that had once defined their existence replaced by a pervasive sense of distrust. The paranoia was not limited to the physical realm. It seeped into the very fabric of their ideology, questioning the foundations of their resistance. How could they fight for a cause when the enemy could strike with such impunity, with such cold, calculated precision? The unwavering conviction that had fueled their struggle for decades began to fray at the edges, replaced by a chilling uncertainty. Was their cause worth the cost, not just of their lives, but of this all-encompassing, soul-crushing fear? The ripple effects of Abu Jihad's assassination far beyond the walls of the villa. Palestinian leaders, once confident in their ability to orchestrate attacks, now became hesitant, second-guessing every decision, every movement. Security measures were dramatically increased, creating a climate of confinement and control. Travel was restricted, communication became clandestine, and the once open channels of information were choked with suspicion. The movement was forced to operate in the shadows, not as a force of liberation, but as a hunted entity, constantly looking over its shoulder. The leadership structure, once a beacon of unity, began to fracture. Infighting increased, as ambitious individuals vied for power in the vacuum left by Abu Jihad's death. The unity of purpose, the singular focus on the fight against Israel, became diluted, replaced by petty rivalries and the desperate struggle for survival. The assassination had done more than just remove a key figure. It had poisoned the very wellspring of their resistance, turning comrades into adversaries and transforming a fight for freedom into a desperate, unending hunt. The bullet, a mere whisper in the night, had shattered not just a window and a life, but the very foundation upon which the PLO's sense of invincibility was built. The strategic victory, though silent in its execution, echoed loudly across the Middle East. It was a victory not in territory gained, nor in political concessions secured, but in the psychological landscape of fear and uncertainty it sowed amongst Abu Jihad's former comrades and those who sought to replace him. The initial shock of the assassination hauled through the plough like a physical blow. Their leader, a man who represented defiance against Israeli occupation, had been taken, not by a conventional military force, but by the unseen hand of a shadow. The villa, once a symbol of defiance and sanctuary, became a tomb of terror. Every shadow seemed to harbor an enemy, every noise a potential threat. The carefully constructed facade of security crumbled, revealing the unsettling truth that no place, no matter how remote or fortified, was truly safe. Panic began to surface amongst the Palestinian leadership. Whispers of betrayal, of compromised intelligence, and of the ever-present threat of Israeli infiltration became the new currency of conversation. The tight-knit ranks, once bound by shared purpose, fractured under the strain of paranoia. Long-held allegiances were questioned, old grudges re-emerged, and trust became a luxury they could no longer afford. Every guard, every assistant, every contact became a potential suspect. The immediate fallout was chaos. Security protocols were overhauled, personnel were rotated, and double, then triple layers of protection were implemented. Bodyguards grew twitchy and suspicious, their eyes constantly scanning the horizon, their hands hovering over their weapons. The PLO's operational tempo slowed as they struggled to adapt to a world where their own security was a fragile illusion. The assassination sent a message to would-be collaborators. Any assistance would result in death and destruction. The victory, however, was not solely about the disruption of PLO operations. It was a demonstration of Israeli reach, a signal to the broader world that Israel would not hesitate to strike at those who threatened its security, regardless of their location. The carefully planned operation served as a chilling reminder that there were no safe havens for those who chose violence against the Jewish state. This was the message Israel intended. This was the deterrent the assassination sought to establish. The tactical triumph was amplified by the meticulous execution. The Mossad commandos, like ghosts, had entered, eliminated their target, and vanished without a trace, leaving the authorities to grapple with the mystery of how such a deed could be accomplished. The skill, precision, and audacity of the operation served as a testament to Israel's intelligence gathering and special operations capabilities, sending a message of strength and resolve. The assassination was a victory that went beyond the removal of a single individual. It was a carefully crafted narrative of Israeli power, a lesson in the high cost of resistance, and a harbinger of a new era of shadows and underwater maneuvers. The battle was no longer about territory and conventional weapons, but about the intangible assets of fear, influence, and the relentless pursuit of their enemies. The air in Sidi Bou Said, usually thick with the scent of jasmine and the murmur of the Mediterranean, felt suddenly charged, thick with an unspoken dread that seeped into the very stone of the villa. The silence of that study, now a tomb, would be amplified in the coming days, whispering a story that defied the simple pronouncements of death. The room, preserved in its eerie stillness, became the heart of a legend, a testament to a man, a mission, and a bullet's fatal journey. The villa itself, once a symbol of Abu Jihad's power and influence, transformed into a mausoleum of whispered fears. The very foundations seemed to tremble under the weight of what had transpired. Locals, previously admiring the imposing structure, now averted their eyes, whispering of ghosts and the long arm of a relentless enemy. The guards, the men who had sworn to protect their leader, were riddled with shame, their eyes reflecting the same shadows that lurked in the corners of the study. They were men haunted by an invisible foe, a ghost that stalked their every step. They questioned their every decision, their every move, wondering if they could have foreseen, could have prevented the impossible. News of the assassination rippled through the ranks of the PLO, a seismic wave. Panic and paranoia became the new norm. Walls that once seemed sturdy now felt porous. Trust, once a cornerstone of their unity, crumbled like dry sand. Every shadow harbored a potential assassin, every stranger a possible enemy. The fear grew so intense that it altered their perception of reality, making every glance, every conversation, a potential threat. The death of Abu Jihad was a constant reminder of their vulnerability, but perhaps more chilling than the immediate grief and terror was the narrative that began to coalesce around the event. This wasn't merely a killing. It was a demonstration, a chilling proclamation that no place was sacred, no stronghold impregnable. The assassination was a message, and the message was delivered with devastating precision, right at the man's table. That table, now the epicenter of a new mythology, became the focal point. It was here, at this very desk, that the great leader had fallen. It was here that his life had been taken, his power snatched away in the blink of an eye. The legend grew in the telling. They spoke of the perfect shot, the silence of the sea, the ghost-like efficiency of the killers. They spoke of the table. Abu Jihad's table, forever stained with the mark of death, became a symbol of vulnerability, a constant, physical reminder of the enemy's reach. The study, the site of the assassination, became a place of pilgrimage. Palestinians, grieving for their fallen leader, visited the villa, their eyes drawn to the desk. They gazed at the papers, the ink, the very scene of the execution, as if searching for clues, for an explanation, for a way to comprehend the incomprehensible. The table, forever transformed, now stood as a silent witness, its surface mirroring the fear, the grief, and the simmering rage that boiled beneath the surface. It was a monument, not to a death, but to the audacity of the enemy, and the enduring resilience of the human spirit in the face of such profound loss. The table became a legend. The world, and even Abu Jihad's own bodyguards, wouldn't fully comprehend the devastating truth until it was far too late. Their confidence, their protocols, their very assumptions about security had been utterly, mercilessly shattered. The echoes of that single, silent shot across the Mediterranean still reverberated through the villa in Sidi Bou Said, a stark reminder of the cost of complacency. The villa, once a symbol of prestige and supposed invulnerability, was now a tomb of shattered expectation. Within its high walls, Abu Jihad's security detail operated with a routine born of years of habit. The rhythmic changing of the guards, the methodical sweeps of the grounds, the unwavering faith in the concrete and steel that surrounded their charge, all of it had created a cocoon of perceived safety. They'd become accustomed to the predictable threats, the visible dangers of street protests and overt acts of aggression, blind to the ghost in the machine that was the sea itself. The early evening of that fateful day in April, the setting sun cast long shadows across the manicured lawns. The air, still carrying the lingering chill of the Mediterranean breeze, had a deceptive tranquility. Inside the villa, the usual routines played out. The family ate their dinner, the television murmured in another room, and guards paced their assigned posts, their thoughts consumed by the upcoming shifts and the mundane nature of their duty. They saw the Tunisian police patrol the neighborhood from afar, the neighbors, the journalists, or all the usual suspects. They felt safe, insulated by the trappings of power and the protective shield of the OLP. They missed the forest for the trees. The sea was invisible. The enemy, it seemed, was predictable. They relied on the predictable, the known risks. Checkpoints on the roads, visible guards with Kalashnikovs, the predictable threats that were, in their minds, easily managed. They'd focused on those dangers with laser precision, all while ignoring the vast, silent threat lurking just beyond the cliffs. They'd forgotten, or perhaps never fully understood, that the sea, a beautiful force of nature, could also be a weapon, that the very element that provided Abu Jihad with a picturesque view and a sense of freedom was also the vehicle of his demise. Their training had emphasized perimeter defense and immediate response. They were drilled in how to repel land-based assaults, how to handle armed infiltrations, how to react to bomb threats and open attacks. The sea was not in their manuals. It was a blind spot, a weakness, a fundamental oversight in their understanding of the threats. They had underestimated the enemy's patience, their ingenuity, their willingness to think outside the box, to use the very canvas of nature as a weapon. The assassination of Abu Jihad became a brutal lesson in the consequences of misplaced faith. It was a testament to how even the most well-guarded individuals, surrounded by dedicated protectors, could be vulnerable to an adversary who understood their weaknesses, their blind spots, their reliance on the familiar. The villa, the symbol of security, was a monument to the unexpected. And the guards, the ones charged with protection, learned that their complacency had paved the way for a fate they could have never predicted. The silence of the sea, the precision of a single shot, and the shattering of a world. The sea, as ever, had swallowed the secret, erasing every trace of the night's execution, leaving only the echo of a single shot and the ghost of a man. The villa in Sidi Bou Said, that elegant white structure clinging to the cliffside, became a monument to silence, a stark reminder of the long reach of vengeance. Today, the villa still stands, albeit a little weathered by the relentless sun and the salt-laced winds that whip in off the Mediterranean. It is a place of pilgrimage now, a sanctuary for those who remember Abu Jihad, who see him not as a terrorist, but as a martyr. The study, where his life was abruptly extinguished, remains largely unchanged, a time capsule of a life interrupted. The desk, the papers, the half-finished cup of coffee, all carefully preserved, a tableau of the moment of his death. Visitors come to pay their respects, to gaze upon the space where a pivotal moment in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict unfolded, a testament to the price of resistance, and the chilling effectiveness of targeted killing. But for those who understand the intricacies of espionage, the villa is a different kind of monument. It is a stark symbol of strategic victory for Israel, the death of a man being a critical strike. The Mediterranean, that vast and indifferent expanse of water, was not just a backdrop to the operation. It was its weapon. The sea provided the commandos with an avenue of approach that bypassed traditional security measures. It was a pathway of stealth, a silent corridor that led them to their target, and then swallowed them whole, erasing all evidence of their presence. The story, whispered in hushed tones amongst security analysts and military strategists, is a study in precision and meticulous planning. The commandos of Shaitet 13, masters of their craft, had rehearsed the operation countless times until every movement, every calculation, became second nature. Their success, however, wasn't solely due to their training. It was the intelligence, the months of surveillance, the careful charting of Abu Jihad's routines and habits, that made the operation possible. They knew the villa, its vulnerabilities, its rhythms. They had mapped the tides, measured the winds, and calculated the precise angle of the shot. The security detail, on the other hand, had failed to grasp the unconventional nature of the threat. They were accustomed to land-based dangers, to car bombs and ambushes. They had focused on the obvious, the conventional, and in doing so, they had become blind to the possibilities that lay beyond their well-guarded gates. Their complacency was their undoing, a lesson etched in stone on the cliffs above the sea. The villa, therefore, is not just a memorial to Abu Jihad, but also a stark reminder of the complexities of the conflict. It is a symbol of the enduring power of targeted assassinations, a tactic that continues to reverberate across the geopolitical landscape. The Mediterranean, that silent witness to the ebb and flow of human conflict, keeps its secrets close, but the echoes of that single shot across the water, the memory of those who dared to strike from the sea, will linger long after the waves have washed the sands clean.